Hi everybody, welcome. Today I want to talk to you about a subject that is very dear to my heart, and it has to do with the spiritual teacher and the spiritual student. So when we awaken, when we start in this journey, especially in the first stages, we usually go to a teacher or to someone who has more of an experience in the spiritual path, especially if you are a sensitive soul, if you are someone who perceives a little bit more than the norm, if you're someone who is empathic. And for those of you who don't know what this is if you have the capacity to feel things from others as if they were happening to you. So you're able to tap into the experiences of others in the same way that you would tap into your own experiences. So you can feel their happiness, you can feel the events that they have gone through in their life, but you can also feel their pain, the hurt, and it goes on until very intricate realms. So you can even feel like if they would even have like a mental disorder or anything, you would be able to even feel that. And of course, if you haven't had or received the tools to deal with this, many times what happens is that these sensitive beings, and I include myself there, we as sensitive beings get impacted by these energies on a regular basis, and we actually end up thinking that all of this empathic feeling is coming from us, and we fail to differentiate what is coming from us, what is being sourced from within, and what is coming from outside or from others. And this includes also the collective field. So the first thing with this is to be conscious about it. And also I will continue to refer to sensitive souls, which for me are like most of the people who are awakening right now. And also if you're drawn to this channel or to my YouTube channel, you know that I work a lot with this, and it's one of my passions to help people who are awakening to their gifts and these capacities, because for a very large part of my life I had these like extra sensory capacities or these sensitivities, and all the time that I didn't really have tools to use them, I suffered quite a bit. So this is why I made it one of my missions to help especially young adults, children, and anyone who is just discovering these capacities, to bring them to a place of empowerment and to teach them how to use them in a way that is very beautiful and peaceful and helpful to them and to others, without driving themselves crazy or not knowing how to handle things. So this is part of what I love to teach and to do. So in that, if you are a sensitive soul and you're here, probably most of the ones who are listening to this are sensitive souls in a way or another. This also means that the way that you perceive the world and the lens, let's say, even the ego, is a bit different than the regular person. So in the old spiritual paradigm, there was so much that we did in order to overcome the ego, overcome the attachments, overcome all of these things that were judged as not part of the light, or that were kind of like necessary to release in order to come into more enlightenment. And this is still true, but the approach is what has been shifting a lot, especially in the recent years in the spiritual communities, where there's more consciousness and love being used as a way to shift rather than kind of this restrictive approach to things. So I lived kind of like both of these worlds still a little bit. And when I started my journey, I remember that I used to do all kinds of things to restrict my mind, restrict my emotions, keep my ego in check, and all these things. And what I didn't realize back then was that my ego, or my even my sense of self, was already so sensitive and so empathic and so kind of wired in a way that it was never going to be like a superior ego. Like there was like almost no ego because of how much in the other direction my ego was already. Like through spirituality, through being sensitive, I was the one who was kind of like keeping my ego in check all the time, but even more so. So what I'm trying to say with this is that there's this balance for a healthy ego. If we are too much on the downside with our ego, then we start to create this lack. And the lack of ego can also be detrimental because it actually transfers in a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-worth, a lack of self-love, etc. So this is where the balance is what feels good to us and what is supporting us and what supports us in different stages of our awakening and our spiritual journey as well. Because perhaps for a person that has always been too much on the other side of the ego, on the superior ego, someone who thinks that, they're the best thing in the world and no one compares to them. And so for that person, there needs to be a deconstruction of the ego. So for that person to perhaps come into a place where they feel like they're one with all, they are humbled, and they can have like a more healthy perspective that they are not the best, they are just the same as everyone. So for that person, and kind of like these deconstruction of the ego would be helpful. But for a sensitive being who has been feeling like an outcast all of their lives, or who have been mistreated by people, who have been overgiving, who have been overextending their love, their compassion, their kindness, and for someone who is inherently kind and cares about others and is always giving to others, for that person, a deconstructing of the ego in the same way as the first person would only lead into, what many of us experience in this path, which is like depression, anxiety, lack of purpose, not knowing where we are, emptiness, loneliness, and all kinds of feelings, because the ego, instead of a deconstruction, what the ego of that sensitive soul needs is actually a boost. It needs nurturance, it needs understanding, it needs love. It needs to be built up again because it was already deconstructed, perhaps in past lifetimes, perhaps during childhood even. So we need to be very careful when we address things, and to know that there is no norm for everyone, and there is always a way for us to progress, but we are all in different timelines and we're all progressing at different speeds, and we all need different things in order to progress. When I was in the first stages of my spiritual awakening, let's say, I would be so hard on myself that I basically vanished my ego, but it was not a good thing. I was actually very, very depressed and sad, and I was, I think, not even 18 when I became a bit suicidal. So this is not the first time that this has happened to sensitive beings, and it's something that is actually a lot more common, very sadly, than it should. And I know many of my fellow healers, spiritual teachers have lived a similar story, where you come into a point of kind of like 0 point neutrality, but and that is part of my journey. That was part of my journey, but I wouldn't want this for anyone else. We all live things differently, and part of the understanding that I want to bring forward now is to be very mindful, if you are a sensitive soul, to choose what approach you have on yourself. And that is why I also encourage the self-love so much, and the self-love path. The self-love process in a being that is awakening spiritually is a process that has to happen within themselves. Because as we awaken as the light, as we awaken in the realization that we are divine too, there needs to be this integration of that knowledge. It is not enough to say or to know, I am one. I'm one with all is one with me, I am one with God. Yes, but how do you integrate that knowledge? How do you integrate the very, very small particle with the huge stream of light? How do you adapt to this truth? How do you resonate in that truth? How does that sound to you? How does that sound to your body? So for me, the tool that I use and that I discover that is the most powerful tool is to start with the energy that you are applying into all of the things that you're learning, into your discovery, into your path of spirituality. If you're forcing yourself to do like I did, I would meditate so much, and I loved it. I loved to do it. But I remember I was very, very strict, and this was also good. It was also part of my journey. But looking back, I know that part of it was perhaps pushing myself too much and using the same energy that I would use in other areas of my life, because those were the patterns that were already in me. So I would use those patterns in the spiritual path, and that doesn't really go that well. Because in the spiritual path, when we are awakened, we are given the chance and the opportunity to break out of all these old patterns and to start creating new patterns and new ways of approaching our own learning experience, our own expansion, our own awareness, our own coming into one with ourselves. So this is for those of you who are perhaps judging yourself, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually, to, please always use the energy of compassion to nurture your growth, not the energy of separation or hate or discrimination or judgment. Because everything that we learn through those energies will not last. It's just the same as what quality of water do you use to water your plants? That will also impact what kind of plants you have, what kind of seeds grow, what kind of flowers grow in your garden. And if you do things through the energy of love and compassion and patience and faith in yourself, even forgiveness, even when you don't feel like forgiving yourself at all, in those moments, that is when you really need yourself the most. That is when you can really show up for yourself and be the light being that you are, for you first and foremost. And once you learn how to be there for you, how to be the light for you, even in your darkest times, that's when you start to become the light for others too. So please always be careful with what you hear and who you listen to, and always know that you are the authority and you are the sovereign being of your own journey, and you create the magic. I love you, and I will see you very soon.